Welcome, friend. Tonight, we are whisked away to Amboise, spring 1519, inside Château du Clos Lucé. Leonardo da Vinci's breath grows thin, while a cipher hides in the Mona Lisa's haze. Before dawn, the king's Swiss guards will seal everything, and a royal spymaster waits to strike. If the cipher is twisted or lost, knowledge drowns and her smile loses its truth. I am Snorelock Holmes, your calm detective in dreams. Before we enter, tell me in comments which other historical mystery you'd like me to unravel while you rest. And for now, breathe easy, I'll carry the weight. Chapter 1, in which a shaving of poplar knocks. Evening settles on my study in a quiet, reasonable way. The lamp sits low, a small sun for one desk. I line up 3 squat vials and twist their corks open. Linseed oil, walnut oil, and spikenard. One by one, I lift each to my nose. Linseed is grassy and faintly nutty. Walnut is rounder, clean as a rain-washed spoon. Spikenard is pepper, a whisper of earth. I can tell them blind, and often do. It is a game I play with my hands while my mind waits for something with teeth. Tonight the game runs too easily. The vials behave, the wall clock behaves. A magnifying loupe rests on a scrap of poplar, and even the grain of the wood is predictable as a good neighbor. I sigh and turn the loupe, watching light roll across its glass like a slow wave. There is peace in skill. There is also a kind of boredom. The knock changes everything. It is frantic, the kind that flips a bolt without waiting. I reach the door as it opens, and a woman stumbles over the threshold, breath fogging in the chill from the hall. She is mid-40s, hair secured against urgency, a silver streak like a swift's flight glinting at her right temple. Ink-stained cotton gloves are tucked at her belt, as if she has run from a conservator's bench to my street without deciding to stop. "Elena Marceau," she says, voice careful, a little breathless. May I sit?" "Please," I answer, already drawing the chair closer. The chair complains softly, wood on wood. I set a glass of water in her hand and wait while her breathing settles into a softer rhythm. The room meets her with warmth and beeswax. She brings a glassine envelope out of her jacket like a secret kept too long. Inside is a sliver of poplar, razor thin, no wider than my thumbnail. The shard catches the light and shows me hairline marks that do not belong to grain. Mirrored letters, so tiny, I feel my eyes adjust as if the room itself has leaned closer to listen. Around the letters, a scatter of symbols scratched so delicately they look like frost or a window. Little marks for sulfur, salt, and mercury, the alchemist's old trio. There is a second object in the envelope too. A crisp printout on glossy paper, the grey-white glow of a machine's eye. It is an infrared reflectogram of the Mona Lisa. Under the paint I know by heart, a faint underdrawing shows at the bodice. A gauzy guarnello. Pregnancy veil used by women of her time. A 19th century rumor had named it modern imaging, has traced its threads like a ghost of cloth beneath oil. Elena's fingers do not shake, though her quick blink tells me what it costs her to be here. During vibration checks, we were calibrating sensors on the frame in the Salle des États, she says, naming the Louvre's largest room with a conservator's gentle pride. A tiny support shim dislodged. A void behind the panel, this was tucked in, sealed with old wax. Security locked the frame down. I should have logged everything, step by step. She breathes once, steady. But bureaucracy can bury discoveries. So I brought this to you. She passes me a small folded note, brittle with age, that someone has kept on purpose. The ink is brown, characters tight and meticulous. It reads, "Guard her smile until the river breathes." Initialed simply FM. FM. A name arrives like a candle lit in an old room. Francesco Melzi, Leonardo's devoted pupil, the gentle scribe of his last notebook. The corners of the world align themselves. Amboise, Clos, Lucé, spring rain. A master with ink on his fingers and a student who loves him enough to hide a sliver of poplar for someone not yet born to find. I tilt the shard under the lamp. The mirrored letters are too fine to read without help, but their movement tells me enough. They were meant to be read the way Leonardo often wrote, backward, as if knowledge should approach from the side, never in a straight line. The symbols, salt, sulfur, mercury, are not decoration. They are a path of sorts. I can feel it, the way a hand feels a lock before it has a key. There was residue, Elena says softly, ancient wax where the sliver sat. The frame's internal cavity is dusted with it. Someone sealed it like a message in a bottle. She taps the printout, and under her paint, a guanello. We always knew, but seeing it again today with clearer contrast after all the debates, it felt like a tug. Her voice is polite even when she is afraid. It's the kind of courtesy that comes from long days in rooms where masterpieces are loved by many hands and protected by thick glass. I nod and point to the loop. "May I?" Her mouth edges toward a smile. "Please." Under the magnifying lens, the poplar splinter becomes a landscape. I see the hairline bites of a needlepoint tool. The mirrored characters do not yet resolve into words, but they lean toward Italian. The alchemical glyphs are placed as if measured, not scattered, and I count the intervals with my eyes. Even spacing, then tighter, then even again. A rhythm hides in the pattern. Where did it fall from exactly, I ask. A micro void near the lower member of the backing cradle. We weren't touching the panel itself, she answers, solidity returning to her voice. A technician tapped the cradle to settle a tiny sensor. There was a whisper, like a leaf sliding, and this fell into my palm. I slipped it into the envelope before anyone could notice. I've spent the last 2 hours walking fast, avoiding cameras I know too well, and arguing with myself. You argued your way to my door, I say. I argued my way to a place where secrets aren't eaten by forms. There is fatigue tucked into her words, like a folded handkerchief. If I report it in the morning, it goes into a folder. Maybe it is studied in a year, maybe in 10. Or maybe it is set aside because anything that could imply intent makes people nervous. She glances at the printout again. I don't want this to be flattened. I don't want it to be used. I look at the note. Guard her smile until the river breathes. That is not an archivist's label. That is a plea from a living mind. And the initials, FM, draw a line to a specific pair of hands in a specific room. Leonardo died in 1519 at Clos Lucé in Amboise, invited there by Francis I. If a fragment was hidden then, by Melzi, the student who guarded his papers, there is a chance it was part of a larger lock. There is a chance that beneath Clos Lucé, along the old stones of its undercroft, something waits that could be opened by someone who knows what kind of smile refuses to be caught. And if there is such a thing, there is, inevitably, someone in that time whose job is to catalogue and to seize. Francis I relied on precise men to inventory wonders, a quartermaster who smiles with his mouth and not his eyes. He has a name, but history rarely writes men like him in large letters. I will find him there. Elena follows my gaze to the shard. Can you read it? She asks. Not yet, I say. Mirrored script holds its sense until warmth. Wood remembers things when you give it breath. She watches me with a kind of tentative trust, the kind that expects clear instructions. I offer only one for now. Rest your shoulders. Drink the water. Let the room be slow. I will look and listen. I cradle the glassine envelope as if it holds a sleeping moth and let the quiet expand. Somewhere a car passes on wet pavement outside, steady as a metronome. The lamp glows. The Mona Lisa stares from the printout with that smile that cannot be caught. I do not try to catch it. I let it be there, at the edge of sight where it is strongest. In my work there is a threshold between waking and the places where history waits. I stand at a door. Tonight the door has a poplar hinge and the soft shadow of a veil. I can feel the case asking, and the answer forming in me is simple and absolute. Yes. Before dawn, I say, without meaning to say it aloud, the king's guards will seal those rooms. If there is a vault, a cipher, a last instruction, the window to protect it is small. Elena's eyes lift. Dawn where? Amboise, I answer. Clos Lucé. Spring, 1519. I meet her gaze and keep my voice easy, as if I were reciting a recipe. I will go there the way I go, the way I always go, while you rest. She nods once, as if the world makes a new kind of sense. Then I'll hold the door here, she says. I'll keep anyone away who would tidy this before it is understood. She folds her hands in her lap, palms together, as if bracing herself against nothing in particular. The clock ticks on. The shard of poplar waits. Chapter 2, in which we discover joy and grief. I set a small bowl on the desk and pour in warm water until it carries a thin curl of steam. The room smells briefly like the inside of a linen cupboard. I slide the poplar sliver from the glassine, lay it on the lip of the bowl, and hold a corner so only the breath of the vapor reaches the wood. Heat softens old wax and wakes inks that sleep better when cooled. The mirrored letters shift as if the wood were turning its head to listen. Lines that were hair-thin grow fractionally darker, definition sneaking in. Slowly the script clarifies into Italian. Gioia e lutto. Joy and grief. Two words like a scale with half its notes missing unless you have lived them. Around the phrase, etched faint as a moth's wing, is a sketch of a rocky escarpment and a humped bridge. The little arc of stone is precise, practical, and odd to include in so small a space unless it is a signpost. The bridge is famous in Lombardy, the Ponte Azzone Visconti near Lecco, a chain of arches like a row of old teeth spanning the Adda. Many have looked at the background of the Mona Lisa and seen those rocks, that curve of water and stone. Geologists have argued hills and strata the way sailors argue winds. Leonardo carried places with him the way some men carry prayers. I set the shard down and bring the loop to bear again. The alchemical symbols are not doodles. Salt, sulfur, mercury. In that old language, salt often stood for the body, sulfur for the soul's heat, mercury for the quick mind that carries messages between. Leonardo used them in notebooks as shorthand for states of matter and states of being. Here, they sit like small waypoints at measured intervals. I lay a small ruler beside them and mark the distances in my notebook, even, then compressed, then even again. Spiral logic likes such rhythms. The underdrawing, Elena says behind me, her voice a thread in the room. You see the guanello? I do, I say, and everything it suggests. We speak gently, as if someone sleeps in the next room, someone we respect. I explain in plain steps because clarity steadies us both. Lisa Gherardini sat for Leonardo around 15 OT. He did not deliver the portrait. He carried it with him through Milan and Rome, and then to France when Francis I invited him in 1517. He kept working on it until about 1519. He used sfumato, paper-thin layers of paint, dozens of them, so edges blur, tones blend, and the eye must do the finishing. That's why her smile comes and goes. The mind completes what the brush only suggests. Elena nods without breaking her gaze from the shard. In infrared, she says, and then she stops, knowing I have already seen. Under the paint, beneath the soft skin of oil, the guanello shows as a faint triangular ghost at her bodice, a small domestic truth, a recent son alive, lost children before, joy and grief held at once on a human face. The smile that refuses capture has reasons a frame cannot show. I continue, not as a lecture, but as one traveler reminding another of the road. Raphael, as a young man, sketched a woman in a Florentine house with a smile like this and columns behind her. That sparked the two versions theory, Isleworth painting, and debates that keep scholars busy at conferences. The Prado copy preserved details, our painting lost over cleaning and time. And in 1911, a restless worker named Vincenzo Perugia lifted the Mona Lisa from the Louvre's wall, hid her in a trunk, and tried to take her home. For 2 years she slept in an apartment before she toured Italy like a heroine and returned to Paris. Through all that fuss, her smile did what it always does. It stayed uncatchable. Elena lets out a breath that is almost a laugh. We try to trap it with vocabulary, she murmurs, and it keeps stepping sideways. It was designed for that dance, I say. Leonardo wanted our minds to participate. He put ambiguity in, as if he were adding a pinch of salt. I trace the sketched humped bridge with a fingertip. This little landscape, I say, links us to Lecco. The geometry of the glyphs, spacing echoes the curves in the Mona Lisa's background. I've seen the same spiral in his notebooks, tucked next to studies of water and air. Leonardo loved spirals. Not because they were pretty, but because they were honest about how the world moves. Elena's 2 rapid blinks return as she weighs risk against need. Do you think the shard points to something physical? She asks. A vault? I think it points to a lock, I say. Not only a door, a way of seeing and breathing that becomes a key. Guard her smile until the river breathes, says Melzi's note. That sounds like a mechanism that listens before it yields. If someone tried to force it, it might do exactly what the river does when a hand slaps the surface. Resist, flood, erase. She studies my face, looking for certainty I will not fake. And if someone opened it, then someone chose understanding over hunger, I say. That is a threshold worth guarding. But we have a clock, Clovis. The past holds its own dawn. Francis I's Swiss guards will walk the halls of Clos Lucé to seal and list Leonardo's effects. A quartermaster will tally what his king might like to own. If that man gets there before we do, he will try to turn meaning into an inventory. He may not know compassion is part of the mechanism. The names sit on my tongue with their full weight, and I let them be. Francesco Melzi, Leonardo da Vinci, King Francis I, Château du Clos Lucé in Amboise, Spring 1519. These are the coordinates. I look at the shard again. Joy and grief, I repeat softly. Gioia e lutto. He made it a password because it is a human truth, not a codebook trick. Only someone who holds both can open what he left. Elena's shoulders lower by a fraction, something like relief in the line of her neck. Then we should go, she says, practical as ever. And then she smiles at her own impossibility. You should go. I will, I say. It will not be like a flight. It will be closer to slipping into the river and letting it carry me to a specific bend. She nods again. Is there anything you need from me? Steady air, I answer, and the patience to keep this room quiet. I arrange the objects on the desk the way a sailor arranges a compass and a map. The loop, the shard, the printout. A triangle that points somewhere older than the paint on the print and younger than the ink on the shard. I add my pipe, not for fire, but for ritual. The body believes in small, repeated things. Elena draws her chair into a corner where the lamplight comes to her like a soft tide. She folds her hands again and looks at the printout without staring. The Mona Lisa returns the courtesy. I dampen a cloth with a touch of clove oil, the scent precise and a little like pepper, and set it near the bowl. Warmth, breath, wood, oil. The elements of this evening are simple. I am not asleep yet, but I am already turned toward the door between worlds. Chapter 3, in which river fog becomes beeswax. I dim the lamp until the room is twilight and I am a shape in it. Objects keep their places. The vials of oil, the loop, the shard, the printout that reflects a miniature moon of glass across its surface. I take the pipe in hand, tamp it with a pinch of mild leaf, and tap ash from the bowl as if sealing a promise. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound is a tiny metronome for intention. Hold this room as you would a slow breath, I tell Elena, and I mean it in the plainest way. If you do nothing else, you will have done enough. She answers with a quiet yes, and the word settles into the wood of the desk like a small anchor. I sit back in my chair and let my spine find the latch where the body remembers ease. The pipe ember glows, then dims, then glows again, syncing with the slow count I use when the world needs gentling. In 4. Hold 4. Out. 6. The surface of the warm water in the bowl trembles the slightest bit and then smooths. The room and I agree on a pace. I close my eyes. Not like a curtain dropped, but like a door left ajar while you lean into another room. The smell of clove oil slips its leash and becomes something else. A spice in the corner of a kitchen where herbs dry over a fire. The chair under me tilts forward and turns under my hands into shaped wood. I feel a pommel, worn smooth by use. My boots find stirrups I have never owned. A saddle rocks under me with the slow certainty of an animal who knows the path. Smoke becomes fog. It rolls up from a river, not hot or cold. It's there. I hear water in the way, a night river can be heard. A strong hush with tiny edges. A lute strikes a gentle chord somewhere inside a house where candles have burned late, and a quill scratches over vellum in a room where someone writes because he cannot help himself. I take a breath, and the breath brings me a ledger of scents. Beeswax polish rubbed into oak, walnut oil and lamp smoke, damp stone that has belonged to a house for longer than the house has belonged to the king. I open my eyes. I am standing in a cloistered gallery at the Château du Clos Lucé. Spring rain ticks on leaded panes. The hallway is a long, warm throat of wood and plaster, hung with sketches pinned to strings and paperweights that belong to hands that are not mine. A candle gutters as I pass, and then steadies. I am dressed as a Florentine apothecary would be, practical and anonymous, the colour of dust and moss. Someone summoned me to brew rosemary steam for an ailing master. My palms know this as if they learned it before I did. The basket at my wrist carries a small retort, a packet of dried sprigs and a small vial that will not see use unless I decide it should, spikenard, to soften the edges of a long night. My boots weigh more than they should because they carry intention too. Beyond a half-open door, a cough. Soft, but present, like a brush that has been asked to do one more line and agrees because it loves the work. Leonardo da Vinci sits in that room, skin translucent in lamplight, grey beard a cloud of thought, ink flecks on his fingers even now. He is real, which is to say, he is mortal. The stakes we spoke of in my study adjust themselves to his breath. The corridor opens into a room where the edges of things dissolve into purpose. Maps are draped like seaweed across a wall. A wooden box of pigment sits like velvet, inviting touch. A polished crystal disc in a fold of linen waits without hurry. Everything hums with potential, not because it is new, but because it is alive in the way useful things are alive. I listen for boots. I do not hear them yet. That is a grace we can use. The Loire breathes on the other side of the shutters, steady, untroubled by plans. The house holds its breath for a moment, then releases it. I touch the jamb of the open door with my fingertips, as you would greet a host without waking him, and step into the world I have come to guard. The journey is done. I have arrived. Chapter 4, in which a hawk counts and a spiral points south. Warm beeswax held the room together. It threaded through the scent of lamp oil and rosemary and damp wool until even the draught under the door smelled like calm work. This was Château du Clos Lucé in Amboise, spring of 1519, in the last hush before dawn. Leonardo da Vinci slept down the corridor. I stood in his studio wearing the quiet cloak of a Florentine apothecary, which in this dream was both disguise and truth. My task was to keep the air gentle and the mind clear while I looked for the one thread that would pull tight the whole tapestry. Outside, the Loire breathed against its banks. The leaded panes sweated a thin veil of rain. Inside, chalk dust drifted like slow snow over maps pinned with black pins, and over sketched hearts and gears, and a half-built wooden bird with ribs like a sleeping sail. On a work table lay a polished crystal disc wrapped in linen. Next to it sat a small box of pigments, ground to velvet malachite, vermilion, the subdued gold of ochre. The room had the calm of a place that had absorbed a lifetime of thinking without raising its voice. I had only crossed to the long shelf where folios tilted like battlements when the door opened on a precise whisper. Etienne de Vaujour slid into the room with the careful ease of a man who has never once bumped a table in a room full of power. He wore a fox fur collar over a black doublet, and the spiral on his signet ring caught the candlelight like a lure. 2 Swiss guards followed, striped sleeves wet from the rain, halberds angled low to avoid the rafters. Etienne's eyes half smiled without warmth. "By order of His Majesty Francis I," he said, voice polished like the ring. "All contrivances and papers are to be catalogued before dawn. The King's Swiss guards will seal the rooms at sunrise." He looked at the shelves as a hawk counts chicks, precise and unhurried. "You are the apothecary who tends the scents?" "I am," I said. "I keep what should be gentle from turning sharp." "A noble calling," he murmured, and he smiled in the way a fox smiles when the coop door is open. He slid a slate from his belt and wrote something in a neat, tight hand. "Everything of value belongs to the crown. A man may keep his faith, perhaps, that he may not keep his keys." He drifted along the shelves, tapping here and there with the tip of a gloved finger, and I let him drift, because danger often shows you what it wants by where its eyes pause. When he passed a folio labelled Sassi di Lecco in a clear, steady hand, his gaze grazed it and moved on. He did not know yet that rock faces can hide better than paper masks. I eased the folio free, my hand remembering the weight of vellum. The cover creaked softly. Inside, sketched strata stacked like the layers of a patient cake. Leonardo's rock studies were meticulous, creases and faults, shadows that understood the slow movement of water and time. Between the lines, tiny alchemical marks had been brushed in barely their ink: salt, sulfur, mercury. The symbols were not scattered, they were measured. They sat at precise distances, like constellations laid over a landscape. Alchemical symbols made sense in a world that saw the material and the spiritual as neighbors. Salt for the body, the concrete; sulfur for the soul, the fire; mercury for the spirit, the messenger. But here their spacing posed a question. What were they measuring? I thought of the shaving of poplar wood Elena Marceau had brought to me in my waking study, etched with mirrored script and alchemical glyphs, and of the phrase gioia e lutto, joy and grief. The same family of marks lived now in this room, waiting for a reader. I looked up as a small draft stroked my cheek. In the corridor, almost invisible, someone had drawn a faint chalk spiral on the wall, no bigger than a hand spread wide. Leather owned his head. It pulled ugable tolls while me go home. Then a bained tay, fierously confronting and a warage. A la for few cornish. He slowed, it curled clockwise, and then stopped. Its tail smudged as if scrubbed by an impatient thumb. The spiral's open mouth pointed toward the south hearth, not the north pantry. A sign for the right eyes, a warning to the wrong ones. Etienne's shadow crossed the doorway. "We begin below," he said to his guards. "Lift carpets, tap stones, empty drawers onto cloths. We are not archaeologists, we are accountants. Make the world add up." He pivoted to me. "Apothecary, keep your kettle boiling. Calm nerves can be counted too." His tone was soft and smooth. The threat inside it was direct. If he reached the vault Leonardo had built and tried to conquer it by force, the flood traps, if the rumors were true, would drown the last notebooks in Loire water. The king would get a chest of soaked pulp and a tidy report, and the humane thread of Leonardo's intent would be cut. The deadline was simple. Before dawn, the Swiss guards would seal these rooms. Between now and then, the vault had to be opened safely, or not at all. I slid the rock study closer to the polished crystal lens. I did not lift the linen. Not yet. Across the room, a small door near the south hearth was latched with a plain iron tongue and a habit of squeaking. I listened. Below us, in the undercroft, boots thumped on stone. A guard coughed. The Loire breathed. The rain said nothing, which was a comfort. In the folio, the distances between salt, sulfur, and mercury matched a pattern I had seen drawn elsewhere, not in a notebook, but on a floor plan. Clolus's undercroft was a place of pillars and arches. The spacing of its supports was a rhythm that repeated. The marks in the rock drawing echoed that rhythm. Because the spacing was the same, the drawing was not only a picture, it was a map. Therefore, the path it described would lie not on a mountain in Lombardy, but on the stones under our feet. I ran a finger lightly along the chalk spiral in the corridor. It was drawn by a hand that liked spirals, yes, but also by a mind that knew when to stop drawing. The tail was smudged right where an ignorant eye would expect the spiral to end. That smudge was not an accident. It invited a hunter to look too closely at the wrong place. Let pointed the attentive to look half a pace to the side. Etienne reached for the latch of a cabinet and paused to polish his signet ring with his thumb. His tell when he was about to lie or to pretend he was not interested in something he desired very much. "We will be efficient," he said, to no one in particular. His Majesty values speed in the service of clarity. "Clarity and speed are cousins that can quarrel," I said. "May I keep the steam flowing?" The master's lungs answer kindly to rosemary. "Do," he said, not looking at me. "But do not breathe for too long in rooms that are not yours." He smiled without closing his eyes. "We will find whatever needs finding. We always do." The guards' halberds ticked against the lintels as they moved out. Etienne followed, leather soles whispering. I stood still in the beeswax and lamplight, the folio open in my hands, the lens waiting like a calm eye. The first clue lay between rock strata, 3 symbols marking 3 distances like steps in a dance. Salt, sulfur, mercury. The smile in the painting Elena had shown me refused capture. The path here might do the same if you stared dead on. Look a little aside, and the way would show itself. That was how sfumato worked. That was how this room worked. I closed the folio, and the dust fell in a slow, forgiving drift. Chapter 5, in which grief and joy speak in a stairwell. I found him in the narrow stairwell that corkscrewed down off the kitchen. Francesco Melzi leaned his back against the wall, face tilted to the dim light that pooled at the landing. Rain had slicked his dark hair to his collar. His eyes were rimmed red the way a lamp has a fringe when it has burned overnight. In his hands he cradled a roll of vellum tied with a blue ribbon, and his fingers worried the knot like a rosary. "Signore," he whispered when he saw me, shifting to Italian out of habit and pain. "The master sleeps." The air in his chest is thin as thread. "I will keep the air gentle," I said, "and I will keep his work from sharp hands." He watched me with tears on his cheeks that had dried in salt tracks and then been moistened again. When one loves a giant, the body knows the difference between a grief that is future and a grief that is present. He left signs none would see, Melzi said, save one who looks through both sorrow and delight. He held out the vellum roll, the blue ribbon warm from his hand. He told me the last safeguard is for the heart, not the hand. The stairwell was a throat of stone. It smelled of rosemary steam and old soups, and also of wet river. Through a slit in the wall, I could hear the Loire, and beyond it the emptiness that precedes dawn. I untied the ribbon. Inside the vellum was a linen-wrapped object heavy only because it mattered. I peeled the cloth back and held a polished crystal disc that caught the stairwell's thin light and made a small fraction of moon. Melzi's voice was careful, not because he wished to hide, but because he wished to be understood without being wasted. He said the vault opens only when one sees as she does. Lisa, between births and burials, gioia e lutto, he wrote. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, the letters written backward, as always, mirror writing to make the hand private even when the words were plain. The scrap held the phrase gioia e lutto and a tiny sketch of a humped bridge. The Ponte Azzone Visconti at Lecco lived in this house in France, like a bird that refuses to forget its original tree. He took from his belt another narrow item, a strip of cloth with a tight weave, its edges hemmed with the care of someone who knows that edges fray where meaning lives. Guarnello, he said, a veil. In paintings, it shows a woman who has given birth. The weave has tiny knots arranged in a repeating ratio. Leonardo used it for his cipher grid. I lifted the lens and the woven ribbon and balanced them both across my hands like a scale. "Show me," I said. We moved to a small buttery off the corridor where the light came from a single candle set in a shallow dish. Melzi set the lens up on a wooden arm, an adjustable bracket with a thumb screw for angle, and laid the Guarnello ribbon beneath where the lens would project. He reached for a leather case and pulled out a folding plan of Clos Lucé, sketched quick but neat. His voice softened as he worked, the way a voice does when it remembers where each mark belongs. "When you hold the lens just so," he said, tilting until the candle's light hit the edge and slid into the crystal, "the points of ink in the rock study appear as faint stars. They do not fall onto a plain surface. They fall onto this weave. And the knots take them." He set the Sassi di Lecco folio open nearby and angled the lens so that a ghost of its tiny alchemical marks, salt, sulfur, mercury, appeared as dim points of light on the ribbon. The Guarnello held them where the knots took the most pressure. It was a map over a grid, and the grid itself was a code. Because the weave ratio repeated perfectly, the same lens could map to the same places in different rooms, so long as the scale fit. Therefore, with the plan of the house in his head, Leonardo could place the vault where a humane man could find it, and a cruel man might not. Melzi's hands were steady now. He placed the plan next to the ribbon and marked where the projected points fell in relation to the drawing of the south hearth and the kitchen steps. "Left of the hearth," he said. "Second step of the stair. Narrow sill under that oak cabinet that never wants to be moved." He looked up at me, young and exhausted and unbroken. "You see how it is?" "I do," I said. "The key is not only in the eyes. It is in the breath and in the refusal to clutch at what wants to be free." His mouth quivered, then steadied. He asked me to learn a rhythm: in for 4 heartbeats, hold for 4, out for 6. He said the room listens when you breathe like that. He built a device that follows the breath and hums with it. He said, it is not a weapon, not even a tool. It is a way of keeping a room kind. He put the lens back in its linen, then changed his mind and left it out, cradled on the wooden arm. I dread that man, he said, and he meant Etienne. The ring he polishes, the way his eyes do not close when he smiles. He eats the last bit of flesh from bones while telling you how tender it is. He prefers cogs to hearts, I said. He believes a machine is a soldier waiting for a command. He fears what cannot be commanded. The painting in Paris said the same thing to me in another century. If you try to pin the smile, it slides. If you look at it from the side, it comes to you. The candle fluttered, and the faint projected points on the ribbon trembled. In the tremble, I saw how the path would become a curve, and how the curve, if seen without trying to seize it, would become the suggestion of a smile on the floor. I inhaled for 4 heartbeats, and held for 4, and exhaled for 6. The stairwell seemed to widen just enough to hold us both without pressing our shoulders into stone. Teach me the words, I said softly, as he would have wanted them spoken. Melzi closed his eyes. Gioia e lutto, he said, and the sound of it was both full and hollow, like a bell with a crack that makes its music larger, not smaller. Joy and mourning together, because Lisa had a new son, and also ghosts for children who did not live. Because she wore the guarnello for her body and the quiet for her heart. He opened his eyes. If you show the path, and I speak the words and breathe as he taught me, it will open. But if the ringed fox forces it, the pipes from the Loire will flood the space and take the papers. He said the choice is between a room full of water and a room full of unarmed truth. We will pick the second, I said. We will make a wall of kindness that even a spymaster can't climb. He looked tired enough to break and brave enough not to. We must move before dawn, he said, as if time were a ladder with a rung missing. He made me promise I would not wait for the king's men to finish their counting. Then we will not wait, I said. We will invite them to look at the wrong wall while we open the right one. We stood in the stairwell where the candles made small halos or damp stone. The sound of the river was steady. The blue ribbon was in my pocket now, not because it belonged to me, but because I would need it to lay the points on the floor. I picked up the lens in its linen and felt the cool circle through the cloth. I had the first clue from the rock study. I had the second from Melzi's hands. And I had the rhythm, 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out, that would let the room hear us when we asked it to be gentle. Chapter C, in which inventory meets intention. Etienne de Vaujour did not stride. He prowled. He was built for the edges of rooms and the places under furniture where other men forget to look. He prowled through the kitchen now, with 2 Swiss guards behind him and a candle pinched between 2 fingers of his gloved hand, as if fire were simply a tool that should not be too comfortable. He spoke to the captain of the guard in clipped French, and the captain relayed to his men in a Swiss German that rolled and then snapped like a wheel over cobbles. Lift the carpet, Etienne said. Tap the stones. Listen. The sound a mouth makes when it wants to open is not the sound a closed mouth makes. We catalogue all, we sign all, the crown will not be surprised at sunrise. He looked at me. Apothecary, stay out from underfoot. I stayed close enough to watch. I kept the rosemary steam gentle, so its veil softened the candlelight rather than thickened the air. Melzi stood by the door with the blue ribbon looped over his hand like a quiet promise. He pinched the end of it sometimes and then let it go, as if reminding himself that knots exist only to be placed with care. Etienne tilted his head toward a plain wooden chest and then away, as if he could afford to pretend boredom to make true desire less visible. "Do you know," he said, in a conversational tone that belonged in a parlor instead of a kitchen under siege, "that some claim a man has almost harnessed perpetual motion? The king collects tales like that and asks me to make them real. Power without end, wheels that turn with no hand to push. Imagine the armies you could march from Calais to Naples." I blew on the kettle spout to keep the steam moving smooth. "Perpetual motion is a rumor that eats its own tail," I said mildly. "The master prefers the motions that end where they should. A pendulum that asks you to breathe." He smiled, and his eyes did not close. "Ah, a device that tells me how to inhale. I will send one to the Pope." He did not laugh. The sound he made trailed off and looked back at itself to make sure it had been heard. He stepped closer, too close, as men do when their power is not quite full and they wish to borrow a little from intimidation. He inhaled the rosemary steam, nostrils flaring as if scent could betray a secret. "You smell of clove," he said, "and of something else, walnut oil on your fingers. The painter's scent. Walnut oil keeps varnish from yellowing too soon," I said. "It also keeps the lips from cracking in winter." "Does it keep vaults from drowning?" he asked, and that was the first time he said the word. He feigned nonchalance by polishing his ring, but the polish was his tell. He knew enough to be dangerous and not enough to be safe. I let my eyes pass over him to the south hearth and the cabinet near it that always resisted being moved. The candlelight shifted as a draught curled under the door. A chalk mark near the floor, half wiped by a heel, made a pale arc or dark stone. The world left small signs. You only had to decline the invitation to stare at the wrong thing. He leaned closer. "You hesitate," he said. "Because the water rises when a fool rushes," I said. "Because some locks prefer kindness to keys." "That would be amusing," he murmured, "if there were not parchments at stake that might teach the French to eat Milan for breakfast and Rome for supper." He let that settle, then turned to the captor. "We force what can be forced. We mark what can be marked. We finish by moonset." Moonset moved the horizon closer. Dawn had been our line. He made a new one an hour sooner. The king's Swiss guards would seal these rooms at sunrise. Etienne would try to pry them before the seal, then present his inventory to the dawn like a dog dropping a bone at his master's boots. The escalation was expected in his mind and accounted for in mine. Panic is a poor tool for a detective. I took a breath and counted 4 beats in, 4 held, 6 out. The room exhaled with me. When he had turned away, Melzi leaned close enough that the rosemary steam covered our mouths. "He will destroy it," he whispered in Italian, the words small to make them fit between the halberds and the ears. "He does not know the danger, the pipes, the flood. He thinks everything answers to a ring." What is the device below? I asked him softly. The one he will misunderstand. Not a clock, Melzi said. Not a bomb. He called it an emotional regulator, but he laughed at himself for the name. It breathes at human pace. It makes a room slow. It hums where anger wants to sharpen. It is tuned to the average heart in calm. If you enter with iron in your intentions, it does nothing for you. You can force a door, but you cannot force your pulse to pretend. It will not open to violence. It listens. He swallowed. If someone breaks it or forces the wrong lever, the clay pipes from the Loire will open and drown the chamber. He said, if a man wants the thing more than he wants the meaning, let him have water. Etienne barked an order, bored with tapping and ready to be satisfied by pulling something that made a sound. A guard hooked the edge of a rug and yanked. Dust lifted in a cloud and settled on boots. Stone gleamed dark where it had been covered for years. The captain tapped a block with his halberd haft and leaned to listen. It made a sound like a mouth that considered opening but decided to keep a secret for a minute longer. The spymaster's eyes slid back to me. You will show me how to open it, he said softly, now that the room had performed as much as he cared for. Or I will find my own way, and if the river speaks, it will speak, and I will write in my book. The vault contained nothing of value but silt. He tilted his head, which would be a pity for whatever you think you guard. Not pity, I said, equally soft. Practicality. The king will accept an inventory that lists useful wonders. He will not enjoy a report that nothing remains, because a rash hand insulted a mechanism designed to reward patience. I let my eyes drift to the captain, who had gone still at the word rash, a soldier who knew traps when they were named without accusation. Etienne weighed the room. He had patience. He had cruelty. He did not have the breath for kindness. He thought himself immune to rooms that insisted on it. That, too, was a leverage point. All right, he said. Midnight. He had moved the deadline once. He moved it again to give himself the satisfaction of staging a scene. You will demonstrate the opening of whatever device is below. You will place your hands where I can see them. If you err, not only your kettle will be turned out. Do we understand each other? We do, I said. Midnight. He leaned closer, as if sharing a confidence. If your trick fails, I will have my men pry every stone until the basement is a field of rubber. We will find nothing, but at least you and I will be finished with hope. He turned and walked toward the south hearth, trailing threat like a scarf. When he had gone, Melzi touched the blue ribbon and let it slide through his fingers. Midnight, he said. The river is lowest then, I said. If anything goes wrong, it buys time we might not have at dawn. And men like Etienne prefer to be seen succeeding in the middle of the night when rivals are asleep. My voice stayed low and even, because I wanted the room to believe me. We will show him something and let him reach for the wrong lever. He will trap himself without harm while we open the right door at the right rhythm. Melzi's eyes filled and cleared. He wants power that never ends, he said. Leonardo wanted understanding that never harms. They are not the same. They are not, I said. And rooms can be taught which to prefer. I pictured the undercroft, 3 marks on a plan, 3 stones on a floor, a lens that projected a smile visible only if you refused to stare at it. I pictured my own breath like a pendulum. In, hold, out. The device below was not for armies, it was for a table where people listened to each other. In another century, I would see paintings guarded by glass and alarms and crowds of eyes trying to catch a smile that did not want to be caught. Here, now, I would see a smile emerge on a floor and feel a lock release with a sigh. The moon lowered, boots shifted, the river spoke its slow consonants. It was time to gather the pieces and let the room hear the plan. Chapter 1, in which the smile refuses capture, and that is the point, the studio answered to stillness. I closed the door and set the bar down with the slow care you give a sleeping child's hand. The air inside smelled of walnut oil and chalk and a line of rosemary that made the shadows less sharp. Leonardo's bench was strewn with instruments that belonged equally to a painter and an engineer. A rolled plan lay under a stone the shape of a heart. The polished crystal disc waited on the wooden arm as if it had been there all along, which, in a way, it had. I placed the Sassi di Lecco folio on the work table and set 2 small weights on the corners, a piece of bone polished smooth by a lifetime in a pocket, and a small lump of lead wrapped in paper that had once been a grocery list. The past knows how to disguise itself as the present. The present learns how to behave when it remembers that trick. I pulled the guanello ribbon from my pocket and laid it flat. The tiny knots made a repeating pattern, a helpful grid that remembered hands and births and the way practical women keep the world from falling apart. Beside it, I unrolled a simple plan of the kitchen and south hearth and stair and cabinet. I moved the lens's angle until the candlelight caught its edge and poured through it like a river that had chosen to turn to glass for a moment. The points appeared slowly. A faint star here, another there. They were not bright. They did not want to be. They were present the way some truths are present, willing to be seen if you do not stab at them with your eyes. The alchemical symbols, salt, sulfur, mercury, dropped onto the ribbon exactly where the knots would hold them. I marked their positions on the plan with light strokes of chalk. Left of the south hearth, second step of the stair, narrow sill under the cabinet no one liked to move. I listened for footsteps and heard none. Etienne had retreated to count his possessions in another room and to enjoy the anticipation of a trick he believed he controlled. Melzi waited in the corridor outside with his hand on the door, steadying himself by feeling the bar's rough grain. I breathed in for 4 beats and held for 4, and let the breath out for 6. The candle flame wavered. The projected points trembled, then blurred. In the blur, something unexpected happened. A faint curve formed. Not a perfect arc, not a drawn line, but a suggestion like the corner of a mouth that has decided to smile without telling the rest of the face. This was sfumato, made into a lock. Sfumato is the technique Leonardo used to soften edges, glazes layered so light blends and renderings of air on skin. It is what makes the Mona Lisa's smile uncatchable. You can see it when you look away. You lose it when you try to hold it. Here, the lens turned points into a curve when the light mimicked breath. The smile appeared only if you refused to clamp your vision on it. That was the test. Not of cleverness, of gentle attention. I moved the plan under the lens. The curve kissed 3 places on the page, and those 3 places aligned with the earlier marks. The path was confirmed. The lock would be where kindness could find it and force could not. On a clear space of the table, I made a small list in my own notations, the way I would in my waking study when I needed to hold a chain of deductions without clenching. Because the distances between salt, sulfur, and mercury in the rock study match the spacing of pillars under close lucé, therefore the drawing is also a map. Because the lens projects points to the guanello weave, and because the weave's knots hold the pattern, therefore the lens plus ribbon is the key. Because the curve appears only when the candlelight trembles at a breath pattern, and because the phrase gioia e lutto belongs to the sitter's truth, therefore the lock opens to a breath and a word said by one who knows both joy and grief. Therefore, brute force triggers the flood trap, and gentleness triggers the pins. Therefore, we must open in kindness and distract cruelty without meeting it head on. I tapped ash from my pipe, in my mind, 3 taps, the habit that tells my thoughts they are aligned, and then leaned over the plan. I drew 3 small crosses. One left of the south hearth, one on the second stair, one under the cabinet. I pictured the stones as they would feel under my fingers, cool, slightly damp, with wax in the pores where centuries had polished what was walked on and left a thin winter on what was not. Melzi slipped into the room and placed the blue ribbon on the table next to the plan. "We can do it," he said, the way a man says the door is hard, and also the door opens. His voice was quieter now, but it did not shake. He understood the mechanism. Understanding makes a person both calmer and more dangerous in the right way. "We can," I said, "and we must resist the desire to rush. If you rush a smile, it turns tight on you." I showed him the projected curve and the way it vanished if you looked directly at it. He smiled softly at that and did not chase it. He stood in the lamplight and closed his eyes for a count of 4 in, 4 held, 6 out. He opened them. He used to sit by the window with his hand in the air, he said, weighing the light between finger and thumb. He would not trap a thing. He would invite it to arrive. He invited the world to be generous, I said, and he built locks that respond to generosity. I let the room hold the silence for a count of 10. Silence is not empty. It is a shelf that makes the objects it holds visible. The river spoke as if into a shell, and the rain moved from steady to softer. The house breathed. Dawn was on the far side of the moonset. We had little time and enough of it, both. "Recap," I said, because speaking a chain of thought makes it more solid for listeners who are weary and for rooms that listen. Clue 1 gave us the map, the rock study with salt, sulfur, and mercury spaced like the pillars below. Clue 2 gave us the key, the lens projecting to the guanello ribbon, Lisa's veil, whose knots hold the coordinates. The vault opens when the smile shows itself, which it does only when we breathe at a calm pace and look without grabbing. The words are gioia e lutto, joy and grief, spoken by one who knows both. If an angry man tries to force it, the flood trap will drown the chamber. If a calm man asks to enter, the pins withdraw. We will breathe. We will speak, the door will sigh, and then we will close it again with its meaning intact. Melzi wiped his face with his sleeve, and the tear tracks became salt again, and then nothing. He told me once that a design that cannot resist a fool is not finished. I think now I see what he meant. We arranged the lens and ribbon and plan into a traveling triangle. I set the crystal arm screw so the angle would be perfect without fiddling in a shadowed basement. On a small scrap of paper, I wrote a set of numbers, 446, to guide breath, and below it a small half curve, a reminder that the smile was the signal. I tucked the scrap into my sleeve, where I would feel it against my wrist. Not because I would forget, but because touch anchors thought. When the air gets busy with boots and demands, we will go down at midnight, I said. We will set the lens and the veil. We will breathe. You will speak. He will hover and glance and unwillingly admire. Then he will reach for the wrong lever, and that, too, we will have arranged. Melzi nodded. He was a student and a guardian both. He had the patience for this. The house had the patience too. But it had watched geniuses and foxes both, and learned how to accommodate brilliance and to frustrate greed. I wrapped the lens, folded the ribbon, and balanced the plan on 2 fingers as if it were a tray with something fragile that wanted to slide. In the corridor outside, a guard coughed and then hummed a tune under his breath. The tune had the rhythm of men who want the night to pass so they can sleep and wake without a new command. I took another breath, 4, 4, 6, and felt my pulse settle into a pendulum. The decision was made. The rest was only steps. Chapter 8, in which we bait the fox and set the candle to breathe. Midnight is not a time so much as a temperature. It is when the world cools enough that things open without squeaking if you ask them. The undercroft of Clos Lucé held steady air and stone columns like trunks in an underground forest. The floor was a map of squares that had been polished by feet and then dulled by neglect in equal measure. A thin sheen of damp lay over everything. The Loire's slow breath pressed into stone. We made our passage down the narrow stair between the kitchen and the buttery. I went first, the lens cradled in its linen, the guarnello ribbon looped over my wrist, the plan tucked flat against my chest. Melzi followed, one hand at the rail, the other on the blue ribbon at his belt. Behind us, a Swiss guard's boots thumped in precise measure. I could not see his face, but his halberd's shadow wrote crooked lines on the steps. Somewhere in the darkness, Etienne smiled. The undercroft opened into a room with the south hearth's underside bricked over and the cabinet's back showing its stubborn boards. I set the candle on a small iron dish and placed it where a soft draught would trouble it, heat enough to make the flame breathe. The rosemary steam from the kettle we had brought was not strong. It lifted in a thin veil, the way a whisper rises in a chapel and then disappears. Here, I said softly, pointing to the first stone left of the hearth. I chalked a small line on its edge. Here, I said, at the second step from the bottom. Another mark. And here, I said, at the narrow sill that jutted barely beyond the cabinet. A third mark. I made each mark no bigger than a thumbnail, so they would be visible to us and less visible to a greedy eye. I set the wooden arm for the lens on the floor and adjusted the screw until its angle met the candle's line. The crystal turned the undercroft's dark into a field of faint stars. The alchemical marks appeared as points on the stones, and the pattern fell into place over the chalk with the satisfaction of a cabinet door closing flush. The guarnello ribbon I laid across the stones, its knots ready to take the points. The river's sound rose in the silence and then fell again, a sleeping creature turning over. Do I breathe now? Melzi whispered. You do, I said. In 4. Hold 4. Out 6. Look not at the points, but at their edges. Look half away. He stood where the angle demanded his shoulders square and his hands at his sides, as a person stands who has loved a teacher and holds himself still to honor him. His breath moved in the rhythm the device below would recognize, an invitation instead of an order. His eyes softened, the lids lowering a fraction. As the candle's flame flickered, the projected points blurred into a soft curve, a smile that did not belong to any face and yet reminded you of one. It drifted across the stones and touched the chalk marks as light touches an eyelid. The air in the undercroft shifted as the pins inside the mechanism felt the hum of calm and the truth of the words. Melzi opened his mouth and spoke as if he were telling the river a secret it already knew. Gioia e lutto, he said. Joy and grief. We had not yet touched anything that could be touched with fists. We had breathed. We had looked with kindness. The room heard us. A soft click sounded like a bird hopping inside a wall. I placed my palm flat on the marked stone by the hearth and listened with my skin. The stone vibrated the way a throat does before it speaks. Another click, inside the step. A third, behind the cabinet's stubborn backside. From the doorway, Etienne's voice slid in as if it belonged to the air. Charming, he said. Apothecary games. Does the room sing for you as well? He stepped into the breathing light with his 2 guards behind him. His eyes took in the lens and the ribbon and the chalk marks and the candle, and made the first of 6 calculations. His face did not change, because he did not like to telegraph to a room what he wanted from it. He liked to inform it after the fact. I did not turn toward him. I did not explain. I kept my voice low. Watch the north pantry wall, I said, and let my voice carry just far enough for him to hear. That is where the latch shows, when the smile crosses it. I had set the decoy earlier, a lever behind that wall that when pulled would drop a grate across a side passage without harming anyone, but blocking the way a fox likes to run. It was set to make a sound satisfying enough that a greedy hand would believe the whole job was done. Etienne did not look exactly where I pointed, because he distrusted any instruction not backed by a writ. He let the instruction land in his mind. He let it sit. Then he let his eyes slide to a point just off it. He is a clever man. Clever men still trip over their own hunger. I turned back to Melzi. Again, I said. In 4. Hold 4. Out 6. He did as told, and the breath moved the candle and the curve glowed over the marks, like a secret that does not need to be loud to be sure of itself. Speak, I said. His voice carried more than a sound now. It carried a life. Gioia e lutto. The pins withdrew with a sigh you could feel in your knees. The right panel by the hearth loosened under my palm, but I did not lift it. Not yet. The grate in the decoy passage was balanced. It would drop if a man took the wrong lever. It would keep him safe and out of our way. The true door was ready for a hand that would not clutch. Etienne shifted. He had seen the movement of the panel at the corner of my vision. He wanted to stand where I was and make the room perform for him. He also wanted me to fail in front of his men. Both wants could not be fed at once. He chose the one that looked like control. Very well, he said. If the lock is where you suggest, why does the north pantry show a seam? He moved to the decoy wall, his glove sliding over a line where the plaster had been given a helpful crack by my chalk. The lever sat behind a small opening, a mouth that whispered, "Pull me." He turned his head just enough to keep me in view and slid his hand inside the opening. "Perhaps your breath is not the only thing that matters," he said. "Perhaps a man's courage is measured by his willingness to act." His fingers curled, his ring flashed. He pulled the wrong lever. The grate fell with a well-made sound, a satisfying metallic finality that told his body he had succeeded while telling the mechanism what it needed to know. The side passage sealed. His guards, behind him, stepped backward in surprise, then forward again. Confronted now with a mesh that kept their halberds on their side and their intentions tucked in their chests. Etienne smiled. He had lost half his angles and did not know it yet. He did not know that the grate had prevented him from reaching the true stones, even if he had guessed where they were. He believed he had closed a door to keep us from fleeing. He believed this because he was a clever man who thought he had invented the shape of cunning. He still looked like a hawk. He did not yet realize the forest was choosing which branches to bend. I rested my hands on the true panel again. The pins had withdrawn. The breath had been accepted. The words had been spoken by one who knew them. The smile had appeared and refused capture in the same moment. The vault was ready to show its heart. I looked at Melzi. "Once more," I said, gently. He nodded. His breath met the candles. The curve grazed the third mark, and the room released another sigh from behind the stones. I slid my fingers under the panel's edge, feeling the cool of iron against skin warmed by work. I did not lift yet. That would be the next act, the one that moves to resolution. For now we were at the edge of the secret, the breath before the reveal, with the fox blocked off in a clean, dry pen where he could see but not touch. The plan was set. The room was with us. The night sat still, listening, ready to move the way a smile moves, when it wants to. Chapter 9, in which a smile opens and a trap closes. Midnight pooled in the stones under Clos, Lucé, the way ink gathers in the comb of a quill. The rain on the shutters above set a light rhythm, soft, steady, impossible to mistake for anything but time passing. We were in the undercroft, the low belly of the house where warmth from the south hearth seeped down between joints of ancient masonry and the Loire's breath crept in at ankle height. My candle made a small island of light over the crystal lens I had set on its hinged arm. Rosemary steam-thinned the flame to a patient halo. The guanello ribbon lay taut across a chalked triangle on the floor, knots aligning to the projected points like stars coming to heal. Etienne de Vaujour watched from the darker edge, fox fur collar pressed tight under his chin against the damp. 2 Swiss guards stood with him, their boots leaving blunt, wet marks. His spiral signet turned once, twice under his thumb. He was smiling a little, but his eyes were counting exits. "Proceed," he said, in a low voice that tried to slip past the ear. "The king is due a tidy morning." "Of course," I answered. "Calm is a tool. It sharpens with use. We will open what Leonardo meant to open, and nothing beyond." Francesco Melzi stepped into the pool of light. He looked as men look after long nights at the bedsides of those they love. His fingers had stilled. He no longer worried the blue ribbon. He nodded to me, then to the lens, then to the stones. He had carried the truth we needed in his memory and the courage to say it aloud. "Stand here," I said, placing him where the projected points grazed the ribbon's knots: salt, sulfur, mercury, the steps in Leonardo's private vocabulary. "Angle your gaze a little left of the candle, not at it. A smile refuses capture. When you try to pin it, it hides." Melzi breathed in visibly. His shoulders rose. I raised a hand and my voice went slow and soft. "In for 4, I said. "Hold for 4. Out for 6. The candle fluttered as his breath lengthened. The rosemary steam drew the light into a soft veil. The crystal lens bent that veil over the chalked marks, and the projected points began to blur at the edges. Sfumato is not hot paint. It is a way of letting borders dissolve. It is physics and patience. Leonardo, who could turn a heart valve into a sketch and a storm into notes, had made an optical key that would not appear to a greedy glance. You had to be gentle. "In, 2, 3, 4, I counted. "Hold, 2, 3, 4. And out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the stones, the points softened into a curve that wasn't a curve, a line that only existed when you didn't look right at it. A hint of a smile appeared, caught in the corner of the eye, like a remembered kindness. I watched Melzi, not the light. His gaze was right averted, patient, tender. He had known births and burials with this family of work. He had carried joy and grief, gioia e lutto, in his hands like water and fire. He whispered the words, not as a password, but as a confession, gioia e lutto. Somewhere inside the wall there was an answer, a quiet click, a slide of an iron pin sheathing itself, another click, lower, then a sigh, nothing dramatic, only the sound of well-oiled wood making peace with motion after a long refusal. A rectangle of stone within the floor softened under my palm. I pressed, slow and even, letting the weight shift. Etienne let out a breath he had not planned to let anyone hear. "At last," he said, and his smile sharpened. He stepped closer, eyes on the spot to the north of us where, hours ago, I had let a whisper fly that the latch lived under the pantry stones. "Stand aside," he told his men, and he crooked 2 fingers in command. One guard raised his halberd like a lever. The other reached for the iron ring set into the north sill. Ring I had chalked, the ring I had oiled. "Careful," I said, with a softness that did not want to be mistaken for kindness to him. Leonardo did not build for haste. Etienne looked at me the way a hawk looks at a mouse that has had the poor sense to speak. Then he nodded to the guard. The ring lifted. The wrong lever came up smooth. For an instant, the undercroft held its breath. Above us, a grate that had slept in a pocket cut into the arch, let go. The weight dropped like a curtain, falling at the end of a play. It struck with a firm clang between us and the north passage, latching into sockets I had cleared of grit with the tip of a knife. No one was harmed. We had built it to be that way. But the effect was complete. Etienne and his men found themselves on the far side of a grid of iron with rounded bars, close enough to see us, too far to reach. The spymaster went very still, then he smiled again, but only with his mouth. "A safety measure," he said lightly, as if he had planned it. "Prudent." He let the signet turn once. He did not rattle the bars, He did not shout. He watched. "We will be quick," I told him, "because reassurance is also a tool. And more importantly, we will be correct." The real panel was at our feet, part of the hearth's southern run where the chalk path had led, not the north pantry. Melty and I lifted it together, palms flat, fingers spread to share the weight. It rose without complaint. The scent that came up was of walnut oil, beeswax, old paper, and the faint mineral cool of clay. Medieval smell of kept promises. Inside was a compartment, not large, but packed with care. Linen-wrapped notebooks tied with narrow blue ribbons, oiled walnut drawers with brass pulls polished by a hand that had loved them, and, tucked as if out of modesty, a small machine of wood and brass. I took the machine out first. It was not beautiful the way a gem is beautiful. It was beautiful the way human pulse is beautiful. Orderly, quiet, sure. Two flywheels sat like patient eyes. A pendulum hung between them on a silk thread, light catching on the small weight at its end. Beside it, a bellows chamber of thin leather and thin wood waited for air. A diagram was pinned to the underside of its lid, sketched in a hand I knew from 100 notebooks. Arrows for flow, spheres lengthened and shortened, notes in mirrored script explaining the tuning. No engine to march o'er. Nothing to drive a cannon. The thing breathed. That was all, and it was tuned to a human pace. I thumbed the flywheel gently. It turned. The pendulum settled into a lazy swing. The bellows opened and closed with a soft hush that matched the count I had used moments before. One of the flywheels had a thin rim of reeds around its edge. As it turned, a faint note rose in the room. Not a melody, only a tone that rounded the stony edges. The undercroft's damp hush settled into that tone as if it had always meant to. Melzy's shoulders dropped, and the tightness in his jaw softened. Even beyond the grate, Etienne blinked slower. "It listens," Melzy whispered. "It regulates," I said. "It takes the fast from a frightened room and returns a pace fit for thought." I kept my voice steady. Leonardo had not made a perpetual motion machine. He had made a perpetual patience machine. The difference was the difference between a war and a council table. He had built a lock against violent intent, not with iron, but with breath and sound. We worked without hurry. I slid open the walnut drawers one by one. Inside, I found notebooks of clouds. Not designs for a gun that never jammed, but studies of air, how light breaks through mist, how exhalation warms the first inch of winter air before it loses the fight. Another drawer held diagrams of bridges that looked like hills and hills that looked like bridges. A study of how the eye lies to the brain and the brain corrects gently when given time. In the deepest drawer, bound in pale linen, lay a set of pages with the same phrase we had found on the poplar shaving and the scrap in Melzy's sleeve. Gioia ed lutto. Joy and grief. Beside the words, a diagram of a face, not Lisa's and yet hers, broke the world into soft edges, halftones, shadow curves, with notes about how the mouth looks when joy is present beside a recent sorrow. Leonardo had not etched a map to money. He had codified a way to see another person without trying to own them. I did not show these to Etienne. There are some things you do not hand through a grate to a man who hunts with paperwork in his teeth. I closed the drawers again, one by one, and the brass pulls clicked soft as a satisfaction. "Catalogue," Etienne said. as if incanting authority could reach through iron. "By order of the king." "And so we shall," I said, turning the machine off with 2 fingers and wrapping it in its linen again. Gently and in order. Leonardo lived under kings and still chose which of his thoughts to share. You now find yourself in the same position, Master de Vinci. Consider it a compliment. He may have heard me, or he may have been listening to the pendulum's ghost, which was still swinging in his mind and lowering his pulse despite himself. Either was acceptable. I handed Melzi 3 items to carry to the king at dawn. A notebook of civic devices meant to ease labor at bridges, a set of diagrams on ventilation for crowded halls, a kindness for castles, not a weapon, and a brief instruction on the empathy regulator, described in careful terms that a court could accept without arming itself. The rest we rewrapped and resealed. I set the panel back into place, pressing until the pins clicked home with the same quiet I had heard. Then I took a nail and dipped its point into wax softened by the candle's heat. I touched the wax to the seam invisibly, a sign to a careful eye, to an impatient one, nothing at all. We lifted the grate with a lever hidden in the hearth lintel, a proper one this time, and the iron rose as softly as it had fallen. Etienne stepped through slowly. If he was angry, he buried it inside a smile borrowed from a man less thoughtful. He brushed damp from his sleeve and made a show of inspecting the floor as if it might reveal a second mind. "Have you satisfied your curiosity?" I asked him. "For now," he said. His signet turned again. "His Majesty will have mourning pages and the names of objects that make himself look wise and his guests comfortable. And you, apothecary, will return to your herbs." I inclined my head. "Sleep, Master de Vinci. The Loire rises and falls whether we count it or not. We have chosen a low tide for this work. That is all." He left with the guards, their boots fading into the upper hall. The tone from the flywheel had already gone to memory, but its work remained, like a good conversation that keeps a room warm an hour after everyone has gone. Melzi stood, hand on the hidden panel, eyes filmed with relief. "Thank you," he said. "Thank Leonardo," I said, and allowed myself one small habit. I tapped ash from my pipe into my palm 3 times, each tap a little quiet period at the end of 3 sentences. We read the signs. We opened the right door. We kept his meaning whole. The rain stayed soft. Somewhere above, a frail cough turned into sleep. Midnight slid toward morning, which meant our time was nearly spent, but our work had landed where it needed to land. The smile had opened a door. The trap had closed without harm, and neither greed nor flood had won. Chapter 10, in which Dawn writes the ledger and I drift home. By the time the first pale edge of dawn touched the Loire, the house had become a creature of breath and heartbeat again. Rooms have pulses. Work changes them. Clos Lucé had been holding itself tense for days. Now it exhaled. We rose through the stair that smelled of beeswax and damp limestone into the corridor where maps hung like quiet sails. The air up here was warmer. A servant snuffed a lamp with a cone and went about laying a cloth for early bread. No alarm, no rush. News rarely moves faster than bread when people are wise. Etienne stood at a table with his slate, writing. He had found his tone again, smooth, clipped rhythm that lets a lie walk on velvet. He watched Melzi unroll the selected pages and names, and he wrote in neat columns. Studies of air, designs for civic ventilation, notes on room harmony. No mention of locks against rage. No mention of flood pipes. He was too intelligent to write the word weapon when his morning would be with Francis I, who liked his geniuses gentle and his guests impressed. Melzi placed the small machine, wrapped in linen, on the table's far edge. "For the king's music room," he said simply. "It makes conversation easier. True words arranged to disarm. The best way to keep a device humane is to describe its humane use so well that no one reaches for another." Etienne's mouth tipped in a practiced corner. "Very graceful, Maestro Melzi." He weighed the bundle with 2 fingers. He heard nothing because it was not working. It did not need to. He had already been breathing slower all night. He made a note. A bellows for the comfort of halls that would play in court. He signed the bottom of his slate with the spiral. Then he rolled his shoulders as if shaking off a long cloak and looked to me. "Apothecary," he said in a tone that suggested we had simply been staffing different ends of the same banquet. "The king values order. You have assisted it. Make no mistake here," the purr in his voice tightened like a string. "Were I to find a weapon in a painter's chest, I would have it before it was named. I do not like mischief inside useful wonders." "Mischief is for children," I replied. This was only care. He inclined his head, a move that credited himself with magnanimity. Then he left, fox fur skimming the doorframe. The Swiss guards followed, their halberds tick-tocking against their knees. The house swallowed the sounds, and then there was only the hush of morning beginning in earnest. We went to Leonardo's room. It opened like a small chapel. White plaster walls, leaded glass, a bed turned toward a window that gathered the first light from the river. He lay there, with a grey beard that looked like breath made visible. His eyes were open, and they were clear. He had not moved in hours, but when he saw Melzi, a fraction of his mouth lifted, a smile that refused to be caught. "Maestro," Melzi said, close to tears that did not fall, because today he had work first. "It is done as you wished." He kept it all inside that simple sentence. The count, the candle, the grate, the books that would go and the books that would stay. Leonardo's eyes went to me. "The world is full of strangers. Some arrive and stand as if they had always been meant to be there." He did not ask my name. In dreams, the introductions have already happened. "You see," he whispered, the voice of a man who had spoken to storms and machines and kings and still liked the rust of paper best. "They always want the step that leaps."